And so here begins the coercion with a threat to blow up his world. How do these confessions, all confessions, interrogations work? Well, you've got, you know, in the sports stories where you have this pattern of struggle, 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 lose, 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 struggle, 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 win, win, win. You got a pretty similar pattern in these interrogation cases, the true and the false ones, because detectives are trained in this. Confront, confront, confront. Accuse, accuse, accuse. Deceive, deceive, deceive. Scare into a feeling of total hopelessness. And then you're going to offer them a life raft. So focus on these moments. Find the confrontations. If it's an oral statement or a written statement, you know that more was said to your client than what is written down on the paper. Ask mom, ask client, ask over and over again, and ask the detectives. Find patterns. These detectives have interrogated others before. Confront, 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 accuse, 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 deceive, 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 scare. And that repeats itself over and over. Now, he's not saying you're going to get the death penalty. Notice that this doesn't have to be sort of life and death. He's saying you're going to juvie jail, which, by the way, also a lie, because we all know they can transfer them, and often do, to criminal court. But he's saying 5.5 years, and to a judge, that seems, well, maybe not the worst offense, right? So you put the story together. And the confrontations continue over and over. You're not a good liar, man, you're not a good liar. And they ramp them up. You're making a poor decision. And really, truly, I hope you don't keep down this path. I hope you choose to go to the right path. Because you're going to have a lot of time in this current path to be staring at cinder blocks and going, man, I wish I would have fucking told the truth because this fucking sucks. This fucking really sucks. Having to hear people scream all night long at the Cook County Jail. Now, this boy had just turned 15. He's in there alone. His mother has left. It's the middle of the night. What choice, what will does he have when you start to do this? You're playing a dice game, the most dangerous dice game of your life. It couldn't have been clearer. And the thing is, I know sometimes we don't get the videotapes. I know that. But this is repeated over and over. This is the pattern. You've got to uncover it.
A timeline of an investigation is going to reveal so much stuff to you. And you're going to need that later on when you start looking at the actual statements. One of the things that's up there is who knew what and when. One of the things that you want to know is, like I said, the detective is going into the interrogation in order to get a statement that it contains what he or she believes to be true at the time. So you need to know what they thought or what they believed to be true at the time when they went into that interrogation. That's going to be very important, as you'll see, when it comes to looking at the actual end result confession. You want to know when there was that switch from the suspect-based from the evidence-based to the suspect-based right there. And it will also help to identify different points of contamination, things along that line. I love timelines, I love spreadsheets, because I'm a visual person. Your jurors are very visual. And when you start putting this stuff down, these things start to jump out at you, at least in my opinion, the way that I work right there. A good test for verification bias is in the UK. One of the things that they do is they make use of timelines, but they insist that their detectives create what they call decision logs. And what these logs are is at every key point in the investigation, you justify that decision based on the information that you have. So you got to, just like probable cause. I am now going to focus on this person as a suspect. This is why. And I write it down. I justify it. Now, what that does is it allows a supervisor to come back 2 weeks from now and look at that and go, okay, he justified focusing on person A as a suspect based on these factors. We've since learned this information. Is that decision still justified? Do we need to reevaluate that information right there?
Now, the good news is that generally speaking, they wanted to hear from your experts. They believed it would be helpful to hear from experts about interrogations when deciding if a confession was true or false, and they believed that it would be helpful to hear from an expert about why someone would falsely confess. But what is kind of frightening about this is that that was 75% on average of the jurors surveyed. So that means 25% are not sure whether or not they care about what your expert has to say, or they know they don't care about what your expert has to say. So certainly something to think about when you're doing your voir dire. Another belief was that police should not be allowed to lie about inculpatory evidence. And the belief was pretty strong. 9.5% of jurors agreed with the tactic of police falsely claiming to a suspect that he or she had failed a polygraph. So you get 90% of people thought it wasn't true. And the numbers go up, but just slightly, for things like lying about the presence of an eyewitness or lying about the presence and the match of DNA. But the thing to remember about this is that just because they disapprove of the tactics doesn't mean that they necessarily think they're provoking or causing a false confession. Again, jurors generally disapprove of promises being made of leniency or threats of harshness, but again, doesn't necessarily mean that they think these are producing false confessions. Now, they also thought the police should have to investigate to determine if the person actually committed the crime before subjecting him to interrogation. Imagine that. And they actually thought that rates of false confession are relatively high. They ranged from estimating 19.5% of confessions were false in child molestation cases all the way up to 24.2% being false in theft. Murder was at about 22%, which is interesting because theoretically, by and large, jurors believed that these false confessions are happening. And so the jurors on your panel theoretically can believe that false confessions are happening. But here's the key. They don't believe that they themselves would ever falsely confess. And the numbers here are overwhelming. 91.3% disagreed that they would ever falsely confess, even to a minor crime. And 93.3% disagreed that they would ever falsely confess to a serious crime. So while your jury theoretically can believe that this could happen, if they are putting themselves in the shoes of your client and thinking, what would I do under those circumstances? They do not believe that they would falsely confess.